Welcome back. We are joined by Paul Rotello and Tom Saadi. Thank you very much for joining us. And Al Robinson. Al, you have some thoughts on issues that are facing Danbury at this time, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for showing up. And Tom, it's been a few years since you've been on the show. I think the last time you were here, we were talking about the parade ordinance, which we won't bring up today. That'll take up a whole hour.
That's a few years ago, Al.
But let's just get right into it. There's a lot of things happening here in Danbury, and the Democratic caucus is taking a lot of stance on certain issues. The first one I want to talk about is the appointment of Mike McLachlan as Director of Economic Development. And why don't you just tell me some of the concerns that the caucus has pertaining to that appointment and how it is not really in the best interest of the city to have Mike McLachlan as the director?
I know that Councilman Rotello will probably speak on a specific point, but I give sort of the general concern. Here was that you have somebody who is going to be representing multiple towns as a state senator. And in that capacity has to represent those towns evenly and fairly, hopefully, and I'm sure Mike will. But also being the economic development director for the city of Danbury, he's going to be compensated, specifically paid to bring economic development to the city, whether that is money from the state grants, whether that is private businesses from other communities, whatever it may be. So the concern was generally that there could be a conflict of interest or a conflict of jobs here. Not that it violates specific provisions of state statute or city ordinance, but that the two jobs inherently in their description and in their functioning could conflict with each other. And in all candor, I'm actually surprised that some of the other towns haven't raised that issue at all. But, you know, being realistic, Mr. McLachlan's from Danbury, and Danbury is the largest town in the district. So it would seem that, you know, the issues would come from this town. You know, and we did have an ad hoc committee meeting on it. There were questions with regard to compensation and how hours would be tracked. And some of those questions were responded to in the committee, and I did feel comfortable with those. But I still don't feel comfortable with the overall setup of an economic development director representing multiple municipalities in the legislature.
Paul, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, well, to begin with, I've known Mike for many years. My family's known his family. We go back decades. Mike's an honorable guy. I know him. He's my next-door neighbor, and I like him. The issue is not one of ethics. I know this has been brought up in the past about the Board of Ethics and rulings and things like that, conflicts of interest. As far as ethics are concerned, I think have been addressed and dismissed, and I believe properly so. The issue, and I can expand on what Tom said just briefly, the issue is simple. Senator McLachlan, Mike as senator, has to represent New Fairfield, Bethel, Danbury, and Chariman. He's got to represent it economically. One of the primary jobs that senators do is to bring money from Hartford back to the regions that gave it to Hartford in the first place. And Danbury's always at a net loss. We always give more money to Hartford than we get back, one of the more richer communities in Connecticut. So the job of a senator is to make sure a good portion of those funds wind up back in the community where they started from, if not in cash and services. That might mean building a school. It could mean building a public works depot, something like that. And it also could mean moving industry in the general direction of a community that can support it with rail and highways and things like that, like Danbury. Now, New Fairfield and Chariman are probably not going to be competing with Danbury for industry, but they could very much be competing with Danbury for something like a school. Mike's job as a senator is going to be to make sure that his community that he represents gets those facilities, but his job as economic developer for Danbury, as a paid employee of Danbury, is going to put him, to some extent, in conflict with his duties as a senator, and that was my issue. Nothing to do with ethics, just having to do with his own job description. Now, I've heard that the city of Fairfield, and also to a lesser extent Chariman, are not particularly interested in industry, so that's not really a big deal. Right. But Bethel is, so there could be a conflict with Bethel. And you know, at the end of the day, it may be something that Senator McLachlan's going to have to answer to the voters to.
No, as I saw in the Danbury News-Times, Mary Connolly, to her credit, did actually 2 editorials on this subject and brought up the fact that on December 29th and in February 3rd's editorial that she mentioned that Mayor Boughton and now Senator McLachlan did state that if McLachlan would become elected state senator, that he would resign or step down as chief of staff because of the obvious conflict of interest between working at City Hall and being the state senator. This seems like, and although we didn't read the fine print on this, it does seem to be that this is the same scenario. You have an individual who's working for the city of Danbury, also trying to serve his constituents in the 24th district. Thus, the conflict comes right there.
You bring up one thing about working for the city. And I know some people have brought up the issue that Lou Wallace, former state representative from the 109th district for 10 years, great state representative, good friend, was a municipal employee. But the issue is not municipal employment, because there are many different kinds of jobs you can have in a municipality.
Right.
The issue here is a specific job, not municipal employment itself. So, comparing it with former state representative Lou Wallace is comparing apples and oranges, or even further apart. This, as Councilman Rotello had said, is an issue of the job descriptions and the job duties and how they can conflict with each other.
Right. I think there's a world of difference between working for a water facility, or better yet, a world of difference between being a history teacher and a state representative versus working for the city of Danbury in the capacity of City Hall in terms of economic development, which your main role should be bringing in economic stuff to your city. How does that benefit Bethel, which has an industrial park? Maybe they want some of that business as well. So, yeah, you guys had an ad hoc committee. What came out of that committee?
Really a positive recommendation.
Yeah, the ad hoc recommended that the promotion go through. Recommended that the council approve the promotion. The ad hoc does not have the statutory power to actually do this, but they can recommend. And the council very rarely goes against an ad hoc recommendation. So I'd be really surprised if he doesn't get the job. And let me just add this. I think a lot of this is perception. And had the senator, before he was elected, during the campaign, announced that he was at least considering this sort of a position, and the voters in all 4 communities were aware of this, it would have gone a long way to dissipating any potential controversy.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second. I know it's kind of rare for me to do this, but the mayor has stated that this is going to be, by having Mike McLachlan in this position, there will be a cost savings for the city, because the mayor stated that Mike is going to be working only a certain amount of hours per week. And what do you say to that?
In just actual dollars and cents in the budget, yes, he's cut down a full-time job to a part-time job. So there is a savings. The issue is not whether you're saving some dollars here or there. The issue is the concern of conflict, and that does a part-time job actually lend itself to being advantageous for the city from a standpoint of economic development. We understand from the ad hoc committee, which addressed some of the concerns we had, that Mr. Shepard, Wayne Shepard, who was the economic development director, who's going to be chief of staff, will take on some of the duties and continue on projects and efforts that he had been working on. That's a good thing. But that means that we're taking from an existing full-time job, adding on to another job, then shifting some of those duties to another position, and shifting some of those duties to another position.
So before this, we had a full-time chief of staff and a full-time economic development director.
Correct.
Now we're going to have a half-time economic development director and a full-time chief of staff, but the chief of staff is going to moonlight a little and help out with economic development. Is that what we're saying?
That's what came out of the ad hoc committee.
Right,
So
and
the
some
mayor
of those.
says what cost the town $150,000 is now going to cost them somewhat less than that, $150 to combine those 2 positions.
Yeah, and to be fair with the
was the
senator,
point that they were
it is, and some of the duties have been shifted to another employee at City Hall. But to be fair to the senator, even though he's going to be paid for a certain amount of hours, he has a reputation of being a workaholic, and he will probably be working twice as many hours. So the city will, just in terms of dollars and cents, be getting a deal on this one. That's not the issue. It wasn't a money thing for me. It was a focus thing. Can he, and it remains to be seen if he can, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll probably vote for the promotion, but can he focus on drawing industry and state funds to Danbury when he is representing also 3 other towns?
But can he, I mean, isn't he, now as a state senator, doesn't he have a bit of a higher profile exposure in Hartford and a larger network to draw from to direct, potential business entities to Danbury or Bethel? Or if Sherman wants a tire plant, we'll put a tire plant in Sherman, or something like that.
But he's not an economic development director for those towns. He's the economic development director for Danbury.
Yeah,
so you just mentioned Sherman, just as said, Marty. You said, doesn't he have more of a high profile to bring it, let's say, to Sherman?
Yeah.
Well, then say, if he's used, with the economic development director hat of Danbury on, to use a proverbial Danbury hat theme, his job is to bring economic development to Danbury. And I think the concern, as Councilman Rotello laid out, it's the focus issue. It's not the absolute dollars and cents here. There are many other areas where the city is looking at saving dollars and cents, and I think that those are areas that we want to go into that are very substantive from a budgetary standpoint that you discussed at the opening of the show.
But what's the bottom line of all this? You guys are going to raise questions. It's going to go through anyways, and we're going to move on. Is that?
It was an awkward promotion. That's all. That, you know.
Well, we'll move on.
Yeah, well, let's move on. Okay. The next topic I just want to bring up real fast. Big things coming up this year is the charter revision. Changes to the charter. Let's just go right down the list. We've been to several. I've been to several of these meetings. I know there's a lot of big issues that are gained a lot of interest in the public and with the press. Number one being the term limits being changed from 2 years to 4 years. I just want to get your feelings on that particular change.
You know, the Democratic caucus came out with a position paper early on, long before the council had to review the recommendation of the charter revision. And that position paper that was unanimously supported, the first issue that we addressed was this recommendation for 4-year terms. And the belief of some charter members and some members of the public and some elected officials that 4-year terms was necessary because elected officials needed enough time to learn their job in order to discharge their duties properly. You know, in all candor, that's a lot of bunk. You know, there have been mayors, council members, commissioners of boards, you know, state reps, state senators who in 2 years have done great jobs and who have been reelected. So, you know, the learning curve here, I don't buy that as being, you know, an issue. So if that's the predicate for having 4-year terms, there's no reason to have them. The other thing is, and it was brought up at the public hearing, and I think other members of the public and the editorials of the News Times have discussed this, it distances elected officials from their constituency. Being able to make decisions in close proximity to elections, I think, keeps elected officials much more accountable for their actions to their constituencies, the broader constituencies and their neighborhoods. So I was very glad to see in a very bipartisan way the Common Council rejected that recommendation. And now it's up to the Charter Revision to see what they want to do in a final report. They don't have to follow our recommendations, but I have a feeling that they'll take them under strong advisement. You know, and that 4-year term also segues into something else I think Councilman Rotello had spoken on regarding bonding.
Right,
and 4-year terms with increased bonding could equate to a very significant borrowing issue and spending on the city side.
And that's the next thing. The bonding has been changed. There was a lot of controversy in that. A lot of discussion with the Charter Revision Commission on how to set the limits. I think now they proposed or recommended that the bonding be increased in the city per year from $500,000 before going to referendum to now $2.5 million per project or a $5 million cap.
Now, is this what the charter revision is recommending?
These are recommendations.
Okay, now it's a $500,000. They can bond that without having a referendum.
Per year.
Per year.
So in terms of the let's say
cumulative per year.
$2.5 million per project or $5 million per year.
Okay.
So in the case of a 4-year term, if I am correct, and you guys can correct me, the mayor could bond $20 million before the voters have a say.
Yeah, you know, the charter, just to back up a little bit, is a general document, and very often it doesn't say specifically what you're supposed to do. There's a lot of implication in the charter. But when it comes to bonding, up until now, and this is a 30-year-old charter, I think it was last revised in the 70s. There might have been a minor one in the early 90s, but the big revision was in the 70s. And up until now, you've been able to bond $500,000 per occurrence. And that had been taken to mean, for the last 15 years at least, that you could only bond $500,000 per year. But the document didn't spell that out. So one of the things they decided to do was actually put a cap on it. Regardless of what the bonding level was, there would be an ultimate aggregation cap. And that cap, I believe, is $5 million. Okay, so the per occurrence was 2.5, and the total cap per calendar or fiscal year was $5 million. So you could do $1 million 5 times. But again, up until this year, we've always operated under the assumption that you could only do $500,000, period. This year we did something different. We did $500,000 several times in one night to a $2.5 million cap. And that was very controversial because a lot of people said, you got to stop at $500,000. So this happened before the charter revision really got rolling on this particular issue. So they came up with a per occurrence limit and an aggregate cap. We felt it was too much, and we asked them to revise those figures down to about $1 million, and that's what we're waiting to hear now.
So what's the process on this? The Charter Revision Commission comes up with recommendations, you give them feedback, then does it go out to a referendum vote to have any of these?
Actually, what will happen now is the council will vote, as we did in the special meeting earlier this week, to ratify our decisions in committee and our recommendations back to Charter Revision. And those included several things. Rejecting the 4-year terms, rejecting the $5 million annual bond, and instead a $1 million per incident and a $2.5 million cap per year. With 2-year terms is $5 million. The big concern was 4-year terms and a $5 million a year bonding without voter referendum. That could mean an administration could borrow up to $20 million without voter approval. Well, that's just unacceptable. We also adjusted some other recommendations regarding the city accepting donations and things like that. Now the Charter Revision Commission needs to mull over those recommendations, decide whether they want to adopt them, adjust their report. They'll conference with the council and then send back a final draft.
And then does the council vote on this?
Then the council gets to vote it either up or down, or vote as presented, or vote up or down specific recommendations of charter. Any changes, we can vote a change up or down. Then we send it to referendum. And we can send it as a single question, or we can send it as multiple questions. So ultimately, the voters will decide it, but we feel it's necessary to go through this process to give the public the best document they can have. This is our city's constitution, basically. You know, all ordinances and all regulations have to fall within the ambit of the charter. The only thing that trumps that is state law and state constitution. So it's a very important document.
Okay, the phone number here is 792-4101, 792-4101. It's live television, so if you'd like to join the discussion and you have a question, please call in. Also, you can email your question, and here's a question that came in talking about jobs. More importantly, can we consolidate other city jobs to save money? If you are pressing unions to cheapen up, why not ask the city to do the same? It seems that economic leaders work hard for less. Why not everyone else? If that man can work his magic, why not combine, say, the mayor's position and the parking authority? That was from one of your constituents. I don't know if it was directed towards me, but why don't you ask about that? Combining jobs. As a matter of fact, when I went to that ever-popular HatCityBLOG and watched the governor's State of the State address, that's what they're doing at the state level, at least that's what they're proposing, to combine a lot of entities, a lot of jobs and things like that. It's certainly something you see throughout the private sector during these tough economic times. You know, you're wearing a couple more hats. Can they do that in the city?
Yes, and I think as we go into the budget process, that's something we will probably see. We haven't been, I mean, we, myself, Councilman Rotello, and other members of the council, as far as I know, haven't been privy to the inside budget discussions. But departments, as I understand it, have been told to make cutbacks. There's going to be flat funding or negative funding in some areas. I imagine we're going to potentially see city jobs consolidated, either layoffs or at least attrition, where vacancies will not be filled.
I like that attrition route.
Well,
myself.
and this goes back.
Less, well, two things. You get a twofer. It's a little less painless, and also when you have people that are retiring, like if you look at the teachers union, for example, the retiring teachers, they are getting paid quite a bit of money. So you're saving that salary as they retire, and then you're not replacing that position. Whereas if you say, well, we have to have a 10% across the board cut, more likely last hired, first fired, but they tend to be lower salaries.
If we can, in a broad spectrum, whether it's in the school side, the Board of Ed side, or the city side, save people from going through losing their jobs. I'm not talking about retirees and attrition, but actual layoffs, by either having consolidation of attrition removed positions or putting caps on some of the growth in certain areas temporarily, understanding that hopefully we'll get out of these difficult economic times.
Caps on growth in certain areas, are you talking about salary caps?
I'm talking about not necessarily imposing. We have, we can't impose a cap.
I like that idea, so I'm not
we're subject to state arbitration
slamming
issues.
The door. I think
what
it's
I'm
a
talking about
idea.
is generally, tightening up things in order to avoid having to lay off people. There's been companies, unfortunately, that have laid off tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people have been laid off in the last several months. The state is looking at layoffs, they're looking at voluntary furlough days or mandatory furlough days coming up. If we can look at the overall budget on the school and city side and figure out a way to fund things, hopefully avoid as many layoffs as possible, keep classroom sizes the way they are, not increase classroom sizes, I think that's the way to go. But that emailer is absolutely right. We shouldn't beat up on one side of the budget. We need to look at everything equally. And that goes into something, I know we're going to talk about this, but administrator salaries and the cabinet position salaries in the Board of Ed and how large they are in the percentages that they're going up. And I think the teachers have a legitimate gripe when they see 9.1% increases in principal salaries under the administrator's contract.
9.1% in 1 year.
That's correct.
What planet are these people living on? A 9.1% increase in 1 year. And so, this is some feedback. This is off the Danbury News-Times talking about the teacher's request that was voted down by the City Council, which we can talk about. But he says, I have no doubt in my mind that a majority of the teachers are dedicated to their profession. But many in other fields are dedicated to, or many of us in other fields are dedicated to our chosen careers too. We're thanking God we have a job. How many of us have taken unpaid furloughs so our co-workers could keep their jobs? We haven't seen raises in the last year or so. We have families to support, as do teachers. Why should they have guaranteed raises? What's your response to that?
Well, let me just preface this by saying both my parents were teachers in Fairfield County, not in Danbury, but in Fairfield County. My grandparents were teachers, and my mother, in the late, probably 1920s, early 1930s, had a father who was laid off from the school system in Danbury during the Depression. It was devastating to that family. I mean, we've all heard stories about the Depression. Some of us are old enough to actually have relatives who lived through it. Of all the things that happened in the Depression, and we're hoping that we are not re-entering that same paradigm, but of all the things that happened in the Depression, a breadwinner losing his or her job was probably the worst possible thing. Sometimes it led to dissolution of the family. The last thing that anybody in government in Danbury wants is to see layoffs at any level. Just because you're a city worker doesn't make you somehow thicker skinned. It's just as devastating for a city worker to lose their job. Teacher, fireman, cop, the guy that plows your streets, it's as bad for him or her to lose their job as it is for anybody in the private sector. So I think that I can speak for the council, that any time we look at any of these contracts, our #1 priority is saving jobs. Automatic raises.
Can I just hold you right there? Because I'm telling you how this goes down. You go to the unions. I don't care if it's a bargaining unit for the school administrators, the guys that do the roads, the teachers union, or whatever. And you tell them, look, we're on hard times. We need to save $150,000 on your contract. Is there any way that you'd be willing to freeze salaries for 1 year that would save the $150,000? And they say, no, we have a signed contract. We're not opening that contract. And then you say, but wait a minute, we got to save $150,000. That means we're going to have to lay off 3 $50,000 salaried people. The unions go, do what you got to do. We're not doing any givebacks. And they throw people under the bus. That's it. You got to do layoffs. Do layoffs. We're not changing. That's the approach.
Jump in at one issue here. And
sorry, he had another follow-up.
Well, I mean, if I could just respond to that, I would hope that's not the case.
It is the case.
Going forward, we are entering this process now. We've rejected the contract, and it's going to go to arbitration. Or hopefully, in an ideal world, it won't go to arbitration. They will meet with all the representatives and bring back to us a lower-level contract without having to go to arbitration.
From your lips to God's ears.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, let's watch this process play itself out. I mean, I don't want to cause me ripples right now. Let's just. I don't want to jinx this or do anything. We know what we need. We need to save the jobs. We need to maintain some sort of budget that people of Danbury can afford. And we've put it back in their hands, the school board and the teachers, and let's just see what they come back with.
Yeah, the one issue here, I think, and some people I think might be missing this ball, is that this wasn't a situation where the union rejected something or where the city or the Board of Ed made an offer that was rejected and they were fighting. This contract actually was signed off on by the Board of Education. And then it came to the council not because we have to ratify it, but we have a statutory right, if we want, to reject the contract. If we did nothing, it would automatically be approved. And the concern, and I raised this at the meeting the other night, was that I felt sort of put on the spot where all these negotiations went between the union and the Board of Ed. members, particularly, a member of the Board of Ed spoke in favor of the contract at the council meeting. We weren't privy to all the details of this. Then it's thrown to us to have to decide. And looking at it now, today's economic situation, the percentages that are in that contract, I think those of us that rejected it made the appropriate decision. That being said, I'm not saying that the union was wrong back in July, August, and September when they were negotiating. Things have changed drastically since then. So I don't want to throw the whole fault on them saying that they rejected reasonable offers. They are right in a way saying that the Board of Ed ratified this. But going back and saying, look, you know what, understand, by law, we are where we are. Let's see if everybody can chip in a little bit here and try to equalize it. And Councilman Rotello is right. We shouldn't be looking at here, and I don't think there should be an absolute pay freeze here. But if we can reduce through mediation, hopefully before arbitration, maybe the raise a little bit and take some of those monies and put them back towards teachers' positions, we can avoid the loss of about 27 full-time teacher positions. Those are the layoffs and the attrition through retirement.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it just seems to be, a more reasonable approach. It also benefits the children as well, because if you don't lay out these teachers, class sizes don't go up.
But administrators and the cabinet officials have to be involved in this as well.
Well, that's just crazy. I mean, it's obscene. A 9 point, whatever you said, 9 point anything increase.
In fact, if I can just jump in real quick. In fact, one of the video clips I do have that I want to show for the viewers here is conversation that you had at the teachers' meeting where you discussed the administrators receiving a 9% raise, which I almost fell out of my, almost dropped the camera when I heard that. I can't believe 9.1% raises. I never received a 9.1% raise in my life. And so if we have that video clip, it's called Teacher's Contract, but hopefully we have it sub to go, and if we do, let's just show that clip for the people at home.
I'm trying to get a scope of, I know Superintendent Pascarella mentioned not taking a pay increase. That's something that's being discussed potentially right now as a possibility, but it's hard to swallow, and I understand everybody deserves compensation for work done. But when we're talking about looking at the teacher's contract, which I have some significant concerns about, I have some issues here, obviously, with the administrator's salaries. I think a lot of people do. I know it was an arbitration. It was rejected, I believe, by the board. No? Yeah. But, hold on. And the chair will control who comes up here.
I'd like to stay out of the administrators.
Well, the reason I think it's appropriate, if we're talking about the whole city budget and how that impacts the city, I think we need to look at also how much is paid to other people within the school system.
For time reasons, I think that other people want to have questions.
And we can, just as a matter of, just a point of order, to Corporation Council, we can start a meeting later than notice, we just can't start it earlier than notice, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I know there's several council members up here that have concerns about what they see as increases, significant increases, significant totals in the administrator salaries. And I think we need to get a sense of what the administrators of this spreadsheet are willing to potentially give back voluntarily to the city. We're looking at state worker layoffs, we're looking at state give back, furlough days, potential cuts in hours, equating to commensurate cuts in salaries. I think we need to look at the whole picture. And I have a question. Somebody indicated to me that, particularly pointed out two principals who are going from, in this second year, I think 09 and 10 of this contract, from roughly $118,000 to $129,000. And that represents about a 9% increase. And that is, I just want to see if is that accurate?
It is accurate.
Okay.
And the two positions you reference are part of a arbitrated agreement.
I understand that.
Award.
I understand that, and that's why I brought the issue of voluntary. I know it's arbitrated, and I know there's not much we can do about that.
I think, Tom, that your question, I think that there might be some confusion. There's the administrators, which are 60 in the administrators union, approximately between 50 and 60, and then the cabinet members, Mr. Longo, Mr. Bray, Dr. Deluski, Dr. Glass, Joyce Emmett. They are not part, actually Joyce is, but the rest of them are not part of that union. So may I see that sheet?
Yes.
Right, so the cabinet members aren't part of that union, okay, that went into arbitration for the 4.5. Okay, their salaries, their contracts are negotiated and voted on by just the Board of Education during the springtime.
So now,
and the board is mindful of the dire economic circumstances, and while I can't tell anyone out of respect to those individuals that we were referring to, I can tell you that the Board of Ed is very mindful, and that the tone has been set as far as the board is concerned by the superintendent freezing his pay.
just so I understand that, through the chair to the chair. So these 16 are the cabinet, and that their award, their compensation package is voted on by the Board of Ed.
There aren't, I don't believe there are 16. Your list is an amalgamate of people. So like Dr. Glass, Dr. Deluski, Mr. Longo, Mr. Bray, and Joyce Emmett. Joyce Emmett is a union member. Those are cabinet members. Okay, those contracts are voted on by the Board of Ed. Okay, they aren't for any union. I think that's where we were getting confused. So I hope that helped.
Thank you. Describes a category, but still the same concerns remain.
Okay, well there you have it. A fine public servant just bravely engaging an administrator or the town. That was the finance director?
Yeah, on the Board of Ed side, yes.
On the Board of Ed side.
Yeah,
that was very good.
I just think that, you know, as a parent myself who's going to have a kid eventually going through the school system, that I can't understand the justification in increasing somebody's salary 9.1% while you're laying off teachers. It's hard to swallow, personally.
Right, and you know, part of this falls into when contracts are rejected and they go to arbitration, there are awards.
Right.
And unfortunately, sometimes those awards can be beyond what you initially rejected. And you know, it's part systematic,
right,
and it's also part negotiation, and that's the problem here. But also, as I think we've all discussed, is, you know what, some of this stuff can be done voluntarily. Just because you can get it doesn't mean you should keep it.
Right.
And other people who can get what they got, if they should keep some of it. But you know, a 9.1% from 09 to 10 up to $129,000, that just seemed very excessive, and that's what I pointed out at the council meeting.
Now, what do you want to say for those? Because there was a lot of people at the council meeting that night, and after that vote went down, there was a lot of hurt feelings, and there was a lot of stuff being said that I don't want to bring up here. But what would you like to say to the people who are in attendance, and for people who might be upset that the council rejected this?
You know, I can only speak for myself. I know Councilman Rotello has some comments as well, is that I will support a raise. And if there's something that comes back in a mediated fashion to the council, I would absolutely support a raise. If something comes back from the arbitrator and the council has to decide, which we will, whether or not to appeal it or to endorse it, I just couldn't support what was before us. But I do hope, though, that while this process goes on, the other categories, the cabinet and the administrators, will also chip in. And hopefully ameliorate some of the financial tightness that we're going to feel, and help to bring everybody back together here. I think in the end that's what we need to do. It's for the kids. I have 2 infants who eventually will be going through the school system, and you know, I understand it. I want the schools to succeed, and I want to keep as many teachers in there, not just to keep jobs, but because it's for the kids. That's what it really is about.
Right now, as things stand, what is Danbury's tax increase going to be for the coming year? Is there any way to project that?
I think it's hard to project because, you know, even on the state level, you don't know how much money you're going to be getting from the state.
I understand. There are a lot of variables, but is there some number you're working towards? If you come, I mean, does your budget have to go to a citywide referendum, or you just set it and that's what it costs? It's just, in Ridgefield, we have to come up with whatever the increase in taxes is going to be, and then that gets presented to a town-wide referendum.
I think your system of government is a little different. You're based on a selectman versus
Danbury. In Danbury, what's going to happen is it's going to be up to those of us on the council, us and the 19 others. We'll have to vote on the budget, on the revenue side as well as the tax side.
So you give the administrators a 9% increase. The teachers come back and say, I know, I'm just saying, but
we didn't give that raise.
I understand. But the teachers come back and they're standing with their 4.2% increase. They're not going to budge a bit. You know, they said we're ready for arbitration. That has an ominous ring towards it. But and you come out with a 5% tax increase. Are you guys ever going to get reelected to the city council after that? I mean, will the city of Danbury absorb that type of a tax increase in these economic times?
You know, I think constituents will pay an increase in taxes if they feel they're getting the commensurate delivery of services for that. So, you know, you can't predict what's going to happen.
Well, how much
6, 7, 9 months from now.
What was the increase in taxes last year in Danbury?
You know, the real dollars?
Yeah, no,
it ranged for people depending on how the property evaluation went. See, as you know, when you change the mill rate, we had revaluation, so the valuations went up, the mill rate actually came down, but some people saw. I actually saw on my property tax, I think it was about a 60% increase with a phase-in.
Because you had a revaluation last year?
We happened to unfortunately coincide a revaluation with the peak of the market. And when people got their papers about where their taxes were, the market had already started to decline. You had a double whammy. You had people's taxes going up while the value of their property was going down. Sometimes it works in reverse. You get a low reval, and then this time it didn't.
You know, I think it's far too speculative right now. We don't know where the numbers are. That's the administration is working on the budget numbers. Hopefully we'll see them sooner rather than later, and we'll work them through.
Let me say this.
Okay, go ahead.
We are in danger. I mean, I don't want to be an alarmist here, but we're in danger of closing a school. We're in danger of taking kindergarten from full day to half day. We don't know what we're getting from the state. So what do I say to the teachers? What do I say to the parents of small children? We are doing the best we can to keep the schools open and to keep the schools staffed. That's what the point of all of this has been over the last 6 weeks. Those two things, schools open, classrooms staffed. That's job one.
Okay, here's some potential good news. Danbury's boldly going to go into the trash hauling and receiving business, and that's going to solve all the problems, because that's going to be a revenue stream.
I don't sense any sarcasm in your voice whatsoever.
The Galanti and everyone else, there must be some money in it, because there are people in prison for trying to, you know, have a monopoly in it. What's going on with that? That was an issue you wanted to talk about.
You know, there's several different points of view among council members. I think a lot of people want to get to the same goal.
Which is what?
Well, the proposal here from the administration is to take over the operation of the transfer station. And people need to understand the operation is not the buildings and the land. The operation are the businesses that are now owned by the federal government by court order, which we recently read about. So the federal government owns the businesses that do the hauling, the collection, the sorting, and the transferring.
And they've been valued at somewhere between $30 million or maybe it's $100 million.
So that being said, they're up for auction. So anybody, you know, any bona fide bidder can bid on them and potentially buy parts, you know, all of them, a group of them. What the city is looking at, what the proposal from the administration is to just acquire the actual operation transfer station, not hauling, but the actual transfer station itself. The hauling would be sold off under the auction and go where it goes. Several of us have been very active in trying to get our federal legislators to try to get the Department of Justice to open up this process and dialogue directly with the city.
I think Chris Murphy was involved, Joe Lieberman,
was
I think Senator Dobb maybe was involved.
To some extent, to try to get an open dialogue, maybe they can give it or work out an arrangement with the city. That being said, I think that's where some of us differ.
Just real quick, because what you're saying is the feds came in and seized these assets from Mr. Galanti, and now they are in the control of the feds, and you're trying to have the federal government cede these or hand them over to the city of Danbury? Is that what you're saying? Potentially?
Just the businesses that operate the transfer station.
Okay.
And maybe not necessarily for free. Something could potentially be negotiated for the public good. That's the idea, the public good. That being said, where my concern is that they're not going to do that. The feds are going to put this up for auction. And I'm concerned about the city now creating a trash authority or a solid waste authority, recycling authority, that then is going to try to proceed and have the city take by eminent domain the land and the buildings where the transfer station operates, and then utilize that to try to, I don't know, not squeeze, that's not maybe the right word, but then try to take control of the business. I don't know how that's going to happen.
Can you do something like that?
You know, I'm not sure how eminent domain works with taking an actual business. I'm not talking about land or buildings. I'm just talking about a corporation. Can you take a corporation through eminent domain? And also, there's another issue here.
Maybe if the guy's in prison who used to own it, there's a clause there.
Well, and there's also another issue here. When a city moves from its governmental duties into what are called proprietary duties, a business for profit, that business doesn't have the shield of sovereign immunity, the protections from liability that a city or state has. So the city could potentially, if it does actually own the transfer station, open itself up to any of the common lawsuits that any business has to deal with on an everyday basis, and some of those could be quite large, from employee issues to slip and falls to hauling and contaminated garbage being transferred through. So those are all issues we'd have to deal with. I just don't have a level of comfort. I think there are far too many moving wheels and ambiguities in this entire process. I've stated that on the record. While I understand and appreciate the end game, I don't see how we get there without a lot of money and a lot of legal battle.
I actually spoke to the mayor's office today on this very issue, and I was trying to get at the end game. I mean, what is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here? How much money are we talking about that could go into the city coffers if we had control of this?
Bottom line, what we want is a legitimate waste hauling operation in Danbury. We're getting into a lot of off-the-rail policy want kind of stuff about, eminent domain and all this kind of stuff. The goal is to clean up the garbage business, not to use a pun or an oxymoron. And we have been suffering under what we've been suffering under for a decade or more. So the idea is, let's clean it up. If it means taking it over, fine. If it means having a public-private partnership, or we own some and the private guys own some, fine. If it means having a private guy come in and do it, that's fine too. The idea is to clean it up. Get it to work, make it competitive, get the rates down, get people to feel like they've got a choice in vendors, that if they call one guy up and they don't like his service, they can call somebody up and get a better deal. That's the goal. How we go about doing that is going to unfold over the next 6 weeks to 90 days, and we'll see where we're going.
And right now you can't do that?
No. The federal government owns the whole thing, except, in this, again, I don't want to get into too much policy here, they don't actually own the land the transfer station sits on. They didn't take that. There's reasons why, and they're complicated, but they didn't take that. We can't, as a municipality, seize using eminent domain something from the federal government. They are above us. We can't do it. Since they didn't take that little parcel of land, it's a couple of acres, we can seize it. We have to pay for it, but we can seize it. The idea here is that we take that. We own the land underneath the transfer station. That will give us some leverage to the business that operates on top of that. They will pay rent to the city. It might even be cost effective. Might even be a good deal. It could possibly even be profitable. We'd be a landlord. That would give us our foot in the door of actually getting our hands on the transfer station if and when that is ultimately disposed of. But right now, the only thing we can do, is to try using eminent domain to get the land of the transfer station. That's enough for me. I mean, we used to own the dump. We could own the transfer station.
Is the primary motivation to clean up the business, to get any organized crime influence out of it, or is the primary motivation to generate a revenue stream for the city going forward?
I would be happy if it was revenue neutral as long as the business was legitimate.
And right now it's not? I
think it's revenue positive now.
No, I'm saying right now the business isn't legitimate.
Well, right now
it's still being controlled by organized crime.
Right now it's owned by the feds, but they're getting rid of it. We want to make sure when it's disposed of, crime doesn't move back in.
Okay. Sorry, you were...
No, again, I'm still trying to get my hands on this.
I've been trying for several months to try,
Yeah, like you just said, there's so many moving parts in this, and it's moving so fast that I fear personally that the public won't have a good understanding of what's going on. And in the end, it's their money being used here. So, for instance, you can't take anything with eminent domain that the feds own.
Correct.
Correct? So how is eminent domain even coming in?
We'd have to wait until some private entity or person bought it through auction, and then see how we could use eminent domain, if we took it that way, to take it away from them.
Well, then the question comes up, then why would you purchase this thing if you know the city's going to come and take it right out of your hands?
Well, that's some of the, again, all these moving parts. That was some of the theory, that if somebody knew that the city was going to take it, potentially, and that was stated on the record, that maybe then they wouldn't even bid on it. And so then the feds would sort of force their hand or be leverage, as Councilman Rotello said. Again, for me, that's not enough for me to vote in favor of going down this unpaved trail of first impression that I've seen in the state of Connecticut. So, we all have different levels of comfort with the way the process is working. For me, I don't have that level of comfort yet to vote in favor of moving forward on this, and for any more dollars for this process, legal, borrowing, whatever it may be.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground. The teacher's contract was essentially rejected by the city council. They're going back. I hope the unions will chip in and help out in these tough economic times. We've looked at the transfer station. We've looked at the economic development director and the chief of staff in town. Covered a lot of ground. I want to thank our guests, Tom Saadi and Paul Rotello, for coming in. Appreciate your time very much. Thank you for that video footage.
As always.
As usual. And next week, we're going to have someone from SCORE, which is an economic guy. And then on March 5th, the mayor, Mayor Mark Boughton, will be right here. He'll have some perspective on some of this. John DePasquale after that, and some Ridgefield Arts program is going to be coming in.